Welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. Hello and welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. I'm Robbo. I'm here as always with Cheeto.
Hello.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about sleeper hit movies or surprise hit movies. So that's movies that were low budget but made a lot of money, or sleeper hits that didn't make a lot of money when they were initially released but made money over time. So I'm going to start, and my first film is Borat, or Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan. And that's a 2006 film directed by Larry Charles. The budget was 18 million and it made 262.6 million at the box office. Now, Borat made his debut on the Ali G show starring Sacha Baron Cohen. And Borat is one of Cohen's characters. He's a reporter from Kazakhstan, and in character he would naively ask questions that were hugely misogynistic or anti-Semitic. So when they announced that a film would be made, people were a little bit nervous about the turnout, because essentially it's trying to turn a 10-minute sketch into a 90-minute film. Would it translate well? And particularly as it's a British film, a British TV show, would the humour translate? Because that's quite often TV shows that have been made into films don't often work.
No.
So it was filmed as a mockumentary, and much of the film was unscripted. Vignettes of Borat interviewing and interacting with real-life Americans who actually believe he's a foreigner with an understanding of American customs. So basically, they weren't told that this was a mockumentary. They actually thought it was real. And there's actually a scene where he visits a rodeo and he's allowed to sing the national anthem, and he sings the Kazakhstan national anthem lyrics to the tune of the US national anthem, and it almost caused a riot. People almost lynched him. So that was kind of how the film was structured. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the film prior to and after the film's release. Some of the participants actually spoke out and even sued the creators because they felt that they were being used. And also it was banned in almost all Arab countries as well. As you can imagine, the government of Kazakhstan denounced the film. But it did make $262.6 million at the box office. So it was a surprise
huge amount of money.
A surprise hit film. That's my first.
Right, yeah. No, I love that film, boy. Right, my first is Forrest Gump, and it's weird, this one, because you'd think how could it be a sleeper hit when it made so much money, but there's a couple of reasons why it was a sleeper hit. So Forrest Gump is a 1994 drama film directed by Robert Zemeckis and written by Eric Roth. It is based on the 1986 novel of the same name by Winston Groom. It stars Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, McKelty Williamson, and Sally Field. And the story depicts several decades in the life of Forrest Gump, played by Hanks, a slow-witted but kind-hearted man from Alabama who witnesses and unwittingly influences several defining historic events in the 20th century United States. Right. Forrest Gump was made at a budget of $55 million, and it made $683.1 million for a total gross of $628.1 million. And now Paramount Pictures actually marketed Forrest Gump in a way that would make it a sleeper hit. So what I'm trying to say is they planned beforehand to almost make it a sleeper hit. I don't know why they decided to do this. Paramount released sneak previews of the film a couple of weeks prior to the release. This is so potential moviegoers would not feel obliged to see a heavily promoted film. Forrest Gump received decent but not great reviews upon release. 75% of the critics on the review website Rotten Tomatoes gave the film a positive review, while others absolutely panned it. Forrest Gump grossed $24.5 million on its opening weekend in the United States and Canada. Paramount removed the film from release in the United States when its gross hit $300 million in January 1995. This is heavily speculated to do with the film not doing as well up to this point as they'd hoped for. The film was reissued on February 17th, 1995, after the Academy Award nominations were announced. Paramount's plan was simple. If Forrest Gump performed well at the Oscars, then the film would gross even more at the box office. This strategy worked. Forrest Gump won Best Picture, Best Actor in the Leading Role, Best Director, Best Visual Effects, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Film Editing at the 67th Academy Awards. The film was nominated for 7 Golden Globe Awards, winning 3 of them. Best Actor, Motion Picture Drama, Best Director, Motion Picture, and Best Motion Picture Drama. The film was also nominated for 6 Saturn Awards and won 2 for the Best Fantasy Film and Best Supporting Actor. Forrest Gump once again hit the box office highs of when it first released. One more reason why it did well is because of home video. Forrest Gump was released on VHS on April 27th, 1995 and on Laserdisc the following day. These are the many reasons why Forrest Gump is considered a sleeper hit, because after this, it made the bulk of its money in its second run as well, and it took, actually, for it to hit, I believe, its overall gross, it took a short amount of time than it to hit its first 200 million. So that's why it's considered a sleeper hit. Oh, right. So, and the film didn't do it as well as they thought they did at the start, so...
I remember seeing it in cinemas when it opened.
Yeah.
And I think people are a little bit confused by the actual title of the film.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember there being a lot of marketing around it. So I don't think people actually understood what the film was going to be about. You think Forrest, what's it, set in a forest or what? You didn't realise it was the name of a guy. So yeah, I think I went in to watch it, not really knowing what to expect, what type of film it was.
I don't know why they chose this strategy. I mean, it obviously worked, but you see this a lot with film studios. They take the film off of like the circuit of theatres, and then hope for a good running at the Academy Awards, and then they put it back on based on that. So. That's where it made a lot of its money from. So,
I mean, it's considered now.
It's considered one of the best films. Yeah, it really is. So,
but that just goes to show, doesn't it? That you know,
anything can be like some. You look at some of the best films of all time. They were probably panned when they came out, weren't they? So,
okay, cool. That's interesting. So my next film is Lost in Translation, which is 2003 sort of romantic comedy, I guess. Directed by Sofia Coppola, and a budget of $4 million, and it had a box office of 118.7 million. And the plot is it's Bill Murray stars as Bob Harris. He's a fading American movie star, and he's having a midlife crisis, and he travels to Tokyo to promote Suntory whiskey. So like a lot of celebrities will do, they'll go off and make adverts in other countries, knowing that they're not going to be shown back in the US.
So it's Sofia Coppola, the daughter of
Francis Ford Coppola. She was actually in Godfather.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
On that,
I've heard about that.
Yeah. So there, he befriends another estranged American named Charlotte, a young woman and recent college graduate played by Scarlett Johansson. And they kind of start this. It's not really. You can't really describe it as a romance. It's more because the film explores themes of alienation and disconnection against a backdrop of cultural displacement in Japan. So they kind of feel like they're sort of odd ones out in the Japanese culture. And so they instantly kind of warm to each other, and they start hanging out together. And I suppose you could call it a romance, but obviously there's the massive age difference.
Yeah.
But when on the face of it, you've got sort of an up and coming Sofia Coppola. I think she'd only ever made one film before this. Bill Murray, who'd not really done a lot up to that point. I mean, and Scarlett Johansson, who was still in the early part of her career. And it really wasn't a group that got many people excited about the film. It started being shown at various film festivals, and then it sort of word of mouth. It got round that it was a quality film with great performances. And the relationship between Murray and Johansson's character, it seemingly affected people in different ways. And have you seen the film?
No, never seen it.
There's a scene at the end where they're going their own ways, and Murray kisses Johansson, and he whispers something in her ear, which is never revealed. So that's kind of a point of discussion as well. It fared better internationally than in the US, but I mean, you can imagine, from a $4 million budget, it returned 118 million, which is nearly 50 times its budget. So it opened in 23 theatres in major cities, including New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And then after that success, it was expanded the next week to 183 theatres. So yeah, it's a good film. It's well worth watching if you haven't already seen it, and definitely a surprise hit.
Just on that budget alone, you can see now compared how much it made. So, right, my next one is Halloween, and Halloween is a 1978 independent slasher film directed and scored by John Carpenter, co-written with producer Deborah Hill and starring Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis in her film debut. The plot tells about a mental patient who was committed to a sanitarium for murdering his babysitting teenage sister on Halloween night when he was 6 years old. 15 years later, he escapes and returns to his hometown, where he stalks a female babysitter and her friends, while under pursuit from his psychiatrist. And now, Halloween was made on a budget of $300,000 around there, which is absolutely nothing, and it made $70 million for a total gross of $69.7 million, which was, at the time, for a long time, it held the highest grossing independent film of all time. It held that bracket for quite a few number of years. Halloween premiered on October 25th, 1978 in downtown Kansas City, Missouri, at the MC Empire Theatre. Regional distribution in the Philadelphia and New York metropolitan areas was acquired by Aquarius Releasing. It grossed $1.2 million from 198 theatres across the US, including 72 in New York City and 98 in Southern California in its opening week. The film grossed $47 million in the United States and an additional $23 million internationally, making the theatrical total $70 million. Making it one of the most successful independent films of all time. Upon its release, Halloween performed well with little advertising, relying mostly on word of mouth, but many critics seemed uninterested or dismissive of the film. It's very simple why Halloween is considered a sleeper hit. One of the reasons is these reviews help people keep out of the cinema. Pair this with a complete production of unknowns, the only personal note was Donald Pleasance. Plus it was released in a relatively smaller number of theatres. None of these helped the box office returns. As it turns out though, Halloween is another film in the long list of films panned by critics but loved by audiences. As more and more people saw it, word spread, eventually putting Halloween into the limelight. It almost became the movie to see in 1978. It became the movie. Although some of the factors previously mentioned are the reasons that it only grossed 78 million. Today it's considered a classic and one of the best horror movies ever made. So,
yeah, it gets shown every Halloween. Doesn't it?
Once again, it's word of mouth is a strong thing, and this is the reason why you shouldn't always listen to critics, because there's so many films where they've been absolutely panned by critics and loved by audiences, and there's loads of films where audiences don't like but critics love. So, and
then later on, critics have to reevaluate the film, and actually, then they actually like it.
Well, I saw an article with the Forrest Gump thing.
Yeah,
they basically said that they were completely wrong and everything. So they do change.
I know Halloween was ultra low budget, wasn't it? They had to film it in California. And it's supposed to be in Haddonfield in Illinois. And so I think they had to bring in leaves, didn't they?
Yeah, in a bag.
Yeah,
because they chuck them out in a scene, pick them up again, and then.
Yeah, because obviously the leaves in California, the trees didn't show their leaves.
No. We're talking ultra low budget, like people, because it's such a big movie. People think it had this huge, but when it didn't, it had $300,000. It had less than $1 million, which is just mental.
And the mask, they had to make themselves out of a Captain Kirk mask, didn't they?
Yeah, it was a $2 Captain Kirk mask from the costume shop down the road, and they just painted it and tousled the hair up, and it was like I don't know how this film worked, because that's everything going against it, but I think just the simplicity of this film made it work. So because
there's a scene in there where they're walking past a hedge and you see smoke come out the back of it.
That's John Carpenter
smoking.
So
whether they didn't have the budget to reshoot that scene or whatever. It's just
Had to keep it in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Well, obviously, I think having Donald Pleasance as well, having a marquee name does sometimes help to sell it. But what happens as well is it's a really good film.
Yeah. Like I said, it's considered an absolute classic, isn't it?
I know it's kind of the first of the considered like the first of like the slasher genre of horror film, and maybe at the time critics didn't like that. It takes time to settle into.
This is the thing. It took ages for it to actually people start coming to the cinema, because, like I said, the only person of note was Donald Pleasance, and when widespread of the people that actually went to see this film, that's when people started going to see this film, and it made a boatload of money after people actually started seeing the film. So it makes sense.
Because traditionally, the way of releasing the film is you open in a small number of theatres, you let kind of word of mouth get out, and then as the demand grows, you open up more and more theatres. So it's a slow building process. So yeah, that's interesting. Cool. Mm-hmm. So my next film is The Blair Witch Project. It's a 1999 horror film directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. The budget was somewhere between $200,000 and $750,000. This is $1,000, and the box office was $248.6 million.
Wow.
It's you've seen.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
So it's a fictional story. You've got 3 student filmmakers. They hike into the Black Hills near Burkittsville, which is previously known as Blair, and they're filming a documentary about this local legend called the Blair Witch. The 3 disappear, but their equipment and footage are discovered a year later, and this purportedly recovered footage off found film is a film that the viewers see. Myrick and Sanchez conceived the fictional legend of the Blair Witch in 1993, and they developed a 35-page screenplay with the dialogue to be improvised. The film entered into production in October 1997, and the photography took place in Maryland, and it took only 8 days to film. They filmed 20 hours of footage, and that was edited down to 82 minutes. The original budget was $35,000 to $60,000, and it had a final cost, like I said, of about $200,000 to $750,000 after post-production edits. Although this is, a lot of people think this is kind of the first found footage technique. It isn't. The first one is the 1980 cult horror feature Cannibal Holocaust, but it is heavily credited with reviving the genre, and it's one that's probably most copied now.
Yeah. Well, Cannibal Holocaust, you can't even watch that, can you?
No.
no one can watch it because I believe the police thought it was real, didn't they, or something, and they banned it. So.
So this film was really, because the obviously the budget, they had to come up with ingenious ways of marketing the film, and this is the first film that really used the internet and viral marketing. And so they produced like missing posters, a website that was dedicated to finding the students, and that's kind of, they were trying to maintain this illusion that this was actually real. And I think even I remember going to see it, and even before you saw it, you still weren't sure whether this was actually a real event or not. And they actually came up with 2 days before the opening, there was a documentary was broadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel called The Curse of the Blair Witch, and it presents the legend as real, complete with manufactured newspaper articles, newsreels, television news reports, and staged interviews. So it was made as an actual documentary. So that would lend credence to the actual film being real. And I thought it was, it is really smart the way that they did it.
I watched it when I was younger, and I thought it was real. So,
I mean, it's well shot. And like I say, it's because it was kind of the first real found footage film, you were never quite sure were you that that it wasn't real.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's to make. I mean, it spawned a lot of copies. Eduardo Sanchez went on to make a film called Exists, which is a Bigfoot film, which again is found footage film. But you tend to find that a lot of low budget horror films tend to be that found footage now.
Yeah.
So its legacy just still lives on.
Of course, it's had a sequel in the last couple of years, isn't it? Which it wasn't very
great.
Good. No.
And I think they did a reboot or a remake within the last 5 years or so. I remember seeing. I think it was a reboot or a remake.
Yeah.
No, it was a reboot because it was actually a sequel to the original film, I think. But yeah, that. I think once you've done it, you can't really do it again because
I think the reason a lot of people went to this film is due to the concept of found footage.
Yeah.
And once you've already done that, it kind of
it kind of detracts from the actual film.
Yeah.
Well.
My next film was American Beauty, and it's a 1999 comedy drama film written by Alan Ball and directed by Sam Mendes. Kevin Spacey stars as Lester Burnham, an advertising executive who has a midlife crisis when he becomes infatuated with his teenage daughter's best friend, played by Mina Suvari. Annette Bening stars as Lester's materialistic wife, Carolyn, and Thora Birch plays their insecure daughter, Jane. Wes Bentley, Chris Cooper, and Alison Janney also feature. American Beauty was made in a budget of $15 million. It made $356.3 million for a total gross of $341.3 million. On September 15th, 1999, American Beauty opened to the public in limited release at 3 theatres in Los Angeles and 3 in New York. More theatres were added during the limited run, and on October 1st, the film officially entered wide release by screening in 706 theatres across North America. The film grossed $8 million over the weekend, ranking third at the box office. Audiences polled by the market research firm CinemaScore gave American Beauty a B+ grade on average. The theatre count hit a high of 1,528 at the end of the month before gradual decline. Like Forrest Gump, a lot of the reasons why American Beauty is considered a sleeper hit is because it made its money over a long amount of time. Once again, due to lukewarm reviews from critics and an odd marketing strategy involving Amazon making their own website, this added to a gradual decline in theatre showings. Another reason why people weren't seeing this film is because it was perceived to be a very confusing film. Word of mouth is strong and this notion spread across the country. Following American Beauty's wins at the 57th Golden Globe Awards, DreamWorks re-expanded the theatre presence from a low of 7 in mid-February to a high of 1,990 in March. The film ended its North American theatrical run on June 4th, 2000, having grossed $130.1 million. American Beauty had its European premiere at the London Film Festival on November 18th, 1999. In January 2000, it began to screen in various territories outside North America. With its wins at the 72nd Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, Best Director, Best Writing, and Best Cinematography, this helped boost its box office returns in the continent. So once again, it had $8 million's an all right number. It wasn't anywhere near to what DreamWorks expected. So they gradually pulled it from the cinemas and waited for the Oscar nominations again, and then they released it in nearly 2,000 cinemas. And this seems to be a strategy, a very common strategy. And with it basically sweeping that year's Oscars, it then...
Well, they needed to get out to be included in that year's Oscar nominations, doesn't it? And then they can take it out of cinemas.
Pull it out and then put it back in.
And then if it does well, they can put it in.
It's a gamble, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. But luckily, like I said, it swept that year's Academy Awards, and then they actually released it in more cinemas than they initially released it in. And then it made the bulk of its money after that, because they can put on that Best Picture tagline onto it, so. But yeah, it's odd because when I was researching, there's all these huge films like American Beauty and all that, and I didn't expect them to be this. I just thought they made money from the off when they really didn't. So, The fact that they even had to pull it from the cinema as well, which is just shocking.
It's like, the fact they release limited release in a small number of theaters just to get in that year's Oscar.
Like I said, it was Los Angeles and New York.
Yeah.
But it's like I said, it's a total gamble pulling it from the cinema and relying on the Oscars. But it worked this time, so.
Yeah. Cool. All right. My next film is Rocky, 1976 boxing film directed by John G. Avildsen. A budget of $960,000. It made $225 million. I'm assuming that these figures are worldwide from the initial release.
I think 225 is probably worldwide.
Because back then, films would generally get released in the US first, and then would be released, the rest of the world afterwards.
I think the reason why is it due to pirating. They don't do it anymore.
Due to piracy, they tend to have a release at the same time now. So, Rocky, we all know, it tells us a rags to riches American dream story of Rocky Balboa, an uneducated, kind-hearted, working-class Italian-American boxer working as a debt collector for a loan shark in the slums of Philadelphia. He's a small-time club fighter, and he then gets a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. This is that typical rags to riches dream story. Back in the 70s, this is the early 70s, Sylvester Stallone was a struggling actor looking for his big break in the business. One night, he actually went to see Muhammad Ali fight Chuck Wepner, who was called the Bayonne Bleeder. And Wepner actually lasted against Ali and actually knocked him down. And that gave him the inspiration for the story. So it was actually kind of a real-life event.
Yeah, I didn't realise that.
He wrote the script in less than 4 days. And this is just to indicate how desperate he was. He was so broke, he had less than $110 in his bank account. And at one point, he had to sell his dog in order to pay some of his bills. So Stallone successfully pitched his script to a film company, and he was even offered $360,000 for the script. However, the caveat was that the studio didn't want him to star in the movie, which is something that Stallone wanted to do. So he held out, and so eventually the producers would agree to let Stallone star in the film, and it gave him a small budget to work with. The outcome of that is that Rocky received 10 Academy Award nominations, winning 3, including for Best Picture. And critics consider Rocky one of the greatest sports films ever made. And the AFI ranked it as the second best in the genre behind Raging Bull. So that really is, obviously it spawned 5 sequels. 4 sequels, and then a later sequel
Reboot of the...
which is kind of a reboot. And then the Creed as well is considered part of the Rocky franchise. But and
this is the thing, I know people might find this hard to get their head around, but Sylvester Stallone wasn't well known at all, was he? He was basically I hate to be in a better way, he was like a bum on the side of the street, wasn't he? He lived in a tent, I believe, or something like that, and he was like Robbo said, he had $110. By the way, he did, for all you wondering, he did buy his dog back after that, didn't he?
He did,
That was the first thing he bought, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So don't worry about that. He got his dog back, but
it's hard to believe that he looking back, that he wasn't like a big star like he is now. And it's funny how a lot of just fate, I guess, does intervene. And
in fact, he wrote the script in 4 days as well. He must have really had the idea of really planned out in his head, maybe, or maybe it's just he was so willing to be a movie star that he wanted to write this film. So,
and again, they offered him $360,000, which I think back then would have been about nearly $1 million.
Yeah,
possibly,
probably about that. Yeah,
or even more, just for the script. And he could have taken the money and run with it, but he held out because he wanted to be in it, which was probably the best move, because yeah, maybe he might have been able to make a living as a script writer, but
But he's made way more money as a
yeah,
huge movie star now, hasn't he? So
well, this obviously is his first and only script. I think maybe
Yeah.
he's
and
he's
even
made.
nowadays, he's one of the biggest names in Hollywood, isn't he? So, and this is where it all started. So yeah. Right, my next film is Scream. Scream is a 1996 American meta slasher film directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. The film stars David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, and Skeet Ulrich and Drew Barrymore. Released on December 20th, it follows the character of Sidney Prescott, played by Campbell, a high school student in the fictional town of Woodsboro, California, who becomes the target of a mysterious killer in a Halloween costume known as Ghostface. And now Scream was made in a budget of $15 million. It made $173 million for a total gross of $158 million. Scream held its premiere on December 18th, 1996 at the AMC Avgo Theatre in Westwood, Los Angeles, California. Bob Weinstein ordered that the film be released on December 20th, 1996, a date others were critical of as it was the Christmas period where seasonal and family films were more prevalent. Weinstein argued this fact was in the film's favour as it meant that horror fans and teenagers had nothing interested to watch during the December period, only Christmas films. When Scream's first weekend takings amounted to only $6 million, it was considered that this release date gamble had failed. But the following week, takings did not drop but increased and continued to increase in the following weeks, leading to a total US gross of over $100 million and high critical praise. There are a few different reasons why Scream took a while to get the ball rolling in relation to its box office returns. First of all, it came out in 1996. Slashers were probably the most out-of-film genre at the time. Literally no one wanted a new one. Halloween set off the slasher craze of the 80s, but due to them becoming an outdated concept, and the fact that the slashers released just a few years prior to Scream were laughably bad, these are a few reasons why there was no room for them in 1996. Another reason is because, like Halloween, Scream was made up of a production of unknowns, the only notable people being Wes Craven and Henry Winkler. Wes Craven done this on purpose as he wanted people to watch the film for the film, not for its cast. Another reason, and perhaps the biggest, is because these films were aimed at a certain demographic, late teens and college kids. This greatly reduced the film's box office numbers. Only when people realised how great this film was did other demographics go and see it. Also, a huge reason why people eventually saw this film is because of the very new meta concept, and it was a very new concept. I don't think people quite understood it. So I think the first big film to use this concept was 2 years prior, and it was another Wes Craven film called New Nightmare, I believe, and that's a Freddy Krueger film, but it was it knew the tropes and the concepts of it, and then Scream came out, and they had a huge marketing thing where they marketed Drew Barrymore as the leading girl in this because she was on the front of all the posters. And spoiler, it's been years, but she's not the main person. She's only in it for about 5 minutes of the intro, and and this I guess you could say it pissed a lot of people off, and they spread it around. And like I said, once again, when you target a demographic, because it's targeted at a demographic, it doesn't necessarily mean other people from out the demographic are going to go and see it. But once again, down to word of mouth, spread how good the movie actually is, made other people go and watch it, and then it picked up the bulk of its money at the end. So that's why it's on my list.
All right. Cool. My next film is not one you think, it's Pulp Fiction. Obviously, 1994 film directed by Quentin Tarantino. The budget was $8 to $8.5 million. Box office was $213.9 million. And Pulp Fiction is a strange film. It's kind of out of sequence. It's got several intertwined vignettes set in criminal Los Angeles. The title refers to the pulp magazines and hardboiled crime novels popular during the mid-20th century, known for their graphic violence and punchy dialogue. Now, you'd think that a film that had John Travolta, Bruce Willis, Uma Thurman, and Samuel L. Jackson in it, directed by Quentin Tarantino, would be an instant hit. Going back to February '94, Pulp Fiction appeared on Variety magazine's list of films in pre-production at TriStar. In June, however, the studio put the script into turnaround, And according to a studio executive, TriStar chief Mike Medavoy found it too demented. Because it is a bit of a...
It's just an odd film, isn't it?
There were suggestions that TriStar were resistant to back a film featuring heroin use, and they also thought that the project was too low budget, which...
Yeah, I mean, 8.5 million.
Yeah, maybe they didn't feel that it would, that would produce a decent film. I don't know. So then they brought the film to Miramax, which had just been bought out by Disney at that time, and they greenlit the film. And that was the first film that they completely financed themselves. That's the Weinstein brothers. So when it debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, the film seemed to come out of nowhere. There was no real marketing behind it. There was nothing published in the trade magazines or anything. And according to critics, the Weinsteins hit the beach like commandos, and they brought the entire cast over to Cannes, and they basically mixed with the critics trying to charm them, and it worked because everyone expected the Palme d'Or to go to Krzysztof Kieslowski's Red, but the Cannes jury, which was actually chaired at that time by Clint Eastwood, gave the Palme d'Or to Pulp Fiction. And off the back of that, it actually opened in the 1,100 theatres, which is unusual because with sort of indie films, they, like I say, they normally open in a small number of theatres.
And they go to where the demand is,
and they roll out as word of mouth
spreads, doesn't it?
Spreads. Yeah. But this opened in 1,100 theatres, massive success. And I think people are more aware now of the film festivals and of the awards. I mean, Palme d'Or now is a prestigious award, and that can bring people into a cinema just as much as an Oscar can now, I think.
Yeah, because like you said, the Cannes Film Festival is considered like a good indicator for film. And I must admit,
that tends to be like a precursor to the Oscars, doesn't it? As well.
Yeah. And this thing, what Pulp Fiction did for indie films, that they weren't just like spat on now. That people took note of it. And it changed how we look at them. So, but really good film. This is really weird because I didn't realise how or why this was a sleeper hit. But it's Titanic, and you think it made a boatload of money. It made a boatload of money. Hidden pun, mate. Yeah. I'm going to log myself out now. Right, Titanic is a 1997 epic romance and disaster film directed, written, co-produced and co-edited by James Cameron. Incorporating both historical and fictionalised aspects, it is based on accounts of the sinking of the British passenger line Titanic. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet as members of the different social classes who fall in love aboard the ship during its ill-fated maiden voyage. And now, Titanic was made in a budget of $200 million. It made $2.2 trillion for a total gross of $2 trillion. This is the thing, the film received steady attendance after opening in North America Friday, December 19th, 1997. By the end of that same weekend, theatres were beginning to sell out. The film earned $8 million on its opening day and $28 million over the opening weekend from 2,674 theatres, averaging to about 10,000 per venue, and ranking number one at the box office ahead of the 18th James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. By New Year's Day, Titanic had made over 120 million, had increased in popularity and theatres continued to sell out. Strong word of mouth kept it at number one for 15 consecutive weeks. It later hit number one again over Easter for a total of 16 non-consecutive weeks. From Christmas to Easter, Titanic stayed in number one spot for all but one weekend, the weekend of April 3rd to 5th, where it was dethroned by Lost in Space. It ended up grossing 600 million domestic in its original run. Once again, it swept that year's Oscars, and in doing so, it made the bulk of its money. So once again, if you think it made $2 trillion, but up till, I think, up to New Year's Day, it only made 120 million. And it was then after, once again, the Oscars, I think it won 11 of the 14 Oscars it was nominated for. And then it made the other, $1.9 trillion after that, which is just astronomical numbers. But yeah, that's why it's considered a sleeper hit, because one, it like I said, I can't, like, for a normal film, like 120 million is really good.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's barely anything in its actual overall gross numbers, and the fact that in the new year it made, like I said, about what $1.8 trillion, which is just absolutely mental. But once again, it was due to the help of the Academy Awards. Like I said, it absolutely swept that year's Academy Awards, including Best Picture. So it's just crazy what the Oscars can do.
I went to see it twice.
Did you?
Yeah. Even though I didn't particularly like it.
It's not my it's not my type of film, but
so because I thought Titanic, it'll be about the events of the Titanic, and I didn't realise that it would have that kind of romantic sub story to it, which I didn't particularly.
I want the action, and it's a James Cameron film. We thought it was going to be action, but
then I had to go see it again with my wife, so it is definitely. And sit through it again.
So, but no, it's mental that it made.
I mean, it is what it is. I can understand why it didn't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Didn't the song get an Oscar as well?
Yeah, the song got an Oscar. Like I said, it tied with 14. I forgot what it tied with. 14 Oscar nominations, and it tied with the amount of Oscars won with Ben-Hur. It won 11 of its 14.
Because that helped to drive the film as well, didn't it? The Celine Dion song.
Oh, yeah. It was huge, wasn't it? And I just still can't get... Even nowadays, when films are expected to hit the billion mark, I still can't get over how much money this film made in such a small amount of time. It's just mental.
But like you say, it's about context. If you're funding a film and it's costing like nowadays, it's 200 million sometimes... You need to make obviously at least half a billion just to be moderately successful.
In 1997, this film was made on 200 million, which is, like I said, that's not round average. It's quite a few films nowadays would be on 200 million, but
when you take a film like Lost in Translation, for example, which I got the math wrong from. I'm sorry. Budget of 4 million, it made 120. That's 30 times. So a film that is 100 million would have to make 30 trillion to be that, to be that successful. So it's everything about context.
So it's quite, when you put it in context, it's quite easy to see that it is a sleeper hit, but it's just when it made that much. It's so odd because it's almost like it stayed in the limelight for so long because it made 28 million.
Sorry, 30 billion, not 30 trillion.
Yeah, it made 28 million on its opening weekend, which is I think that was just under Jurassic Park's level, and then it stayed in the limelight, but it just wasn't making as much money as they expected. And this is the thing: they made 120 million by the new year, but that still didn't get its budget back, did it? So. That would still be considered a failure.
The opening weekend tends to be the most important thing for judging how successful it's going to be, and how many other theatres to show it in. I mean, there are films that have had a really strong opening weekend, but then just fizzled out. But then there's some that have gone on to really, really be big.
But like I said, it from that initial stretch of the new year to like the Oscar season, it just won so much. It got so much box office returns. It's crazy, but that's why it's on my list.
Cool, that's interesting actually. My next film is The King's Speech, which is 2010, directed by Tom Holland. The budget was $15 million, and it made $414 million. And it's kind of a film that you wouldn't think it would have mass appeal.
No.
Colin Firth plays the future King George VI, who, to cope with a stammer, he sees Lionel Logue, who's an Australian speech and language therapist, played by Geoffrey Rush. The men become friends as they work together, and after George's brother's abdication from the throne, the new king relies on Logue to help him make his first wartime radio broadcast upon Britain's declaration of war on Germany in 1939. So again, it's not what you would expect to be a blockbuster plot. Plus, you've got the director Tom Holland, who actually came from TV. He was most known for directing the British soap opera EastEnders, and the only film that he'd made before that was The Damned United, which is about Brian Clough's tenure as Leeds United manager in the 70s.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the film where there's a minute-long scene where Logue encourages the king to shout profanities, which he could do without a stammer. And that led to the British Board of Film Classification giving it a 15 certificate. So that obviously limited its audience then. Hooper criticised the decision, questioning how the board could certify the film 15 for bad language but allow films such as Salt and Casino Royale to have a 12A rating despite graphic torture scenes. And following this, the board lowered the rating to 12A, so that allowed children 12 and under to see the film if they're accompanied by an adult. Hooper levelled the same criticism at the Motion Picture Association of America, which gave the film an R rating, preventing anyone under the age of 17 from seeing the film without an adult. And Miramax actually considered recutting the film to get a lower certificate, or even bleeping out the swear words. But Hooper resisted this. The problem was that people loved this film, but they loved it only after they heard that other people had loved it. So it was pretty much, word of mouth. The opening weekend, despite a limited release almost a month prior, it could only manage 11th place in the US domestic box office with 4 million, which is pretty disappointing. But as often is the case, when people get talking, and obviously the controversy over this classification, does help as well.
Yeah.
The audience figures started to increase, and obviously that post-Oscar bump that you get, because it won. Colin Firth won an Oscar for Best Actor. It also won Best Picture, and so it helped to reverse. Because normally a film opens and then it's kind of declines, but then the Oscars helped to get it over that bump and start an upward
trajectory.
Trajectory again. And it spent a total of 10 weeks in the top 10 after that.
But this is the thing. They may at the time have thought that the 15 certification would have done it harm. Yeah. But the fact that there was all this drama going on around this film, people then want to see it, don't they? They want to see what...
There's a lot of films that have had controversy around them, and that adds to people wanting to see it.
Because that's the thing. Any little bit of drama surrounding a film, it's going to make people want to go and see it, doesn't it? So it actually maybe helped it in its one. But
that's one of those that was really helped by word of mouth, because people liked it, but they waited for other people to see it and then tell them that it was good.
And then they go and see it.
And they go and see it.
Start off that chain
reaction. And then,
reaction.
obviously, with the Oscars, then that gave it a little increase as well.
I didn't realise it won Best Picture. I knew he won, Colin Firth won Best Actor, but I didn't realise it won Best Picture. So, that's obviously going to put people back into the cinema to watch it, isn't it?
It was sort of a very British film with a very British story, and it was a risk because, obviously, how would that be received? I know sort of Americans tend to love royalty in that, but would that, and if it's released alongside other films that...
Yeah, like I said, it's not the most exciting plot as in terms of, and like you said, it's got like a dark filter on it. It's just very very British, but maybe that helped it as well. You never know.
But it's got that feel good factor as well, which does help.
Yeah, and it's a good film as well. So, right, my next film was Casino Royale. Casino Royale was a 2006 spy film, the 21st in the Eon Productions James Bond series, and a third screen adaptation of Ian Fleming's 1953 novel of the same name. Directed by Martin Campbell and written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade and Paul Haggis, it is the first film to star Daniel Craig as the fictional MI6 agent James Bond. Casino Royale takes place at the beginning of Bond's career as Agent 007, as he is earning his license to kill. The plot has Bond on an assignment to bankrupt terrorist financier Le Chiffre in a high-stakes poker game at the Casino Royale in Montenegro. Bond falls in love with Vesper Lind, a Treasury employee assigned to provide the money he needs for the game. And now Casino Royale was made on a budget of $150 million. It made $616.5 million for total grosses of $465.2 million. Casino Royale premiered at the Odeon Leicester Square on 14th of November 2006. It received an overwhelmingly positive critical response, with reviewers highlighting Craig's reinvention of the character and the film's departure from the tropes of previous Bond films. The reason why Casino Royale is considered a sleeper hit is because it once again made its money over a stretched period of time. In the UK and mainland Europe, it was a critical and financial success, becoming one of the highest earning films ever on the continent. While it made $40 million in its opening day weekend in the US, it was only shown on some 350 cinemas across the country. This was due to the success of Happy Feet coming out. Once word of mouth spread about the film, more people went to see it. This high demand caused more cinemas to show it, and therefore it made the bulk of its money. I find it really odd, because even in the US, the reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Happy Feet had its time, but in the long run, Casino Royale won the battle. So it's another thing where it's going against another film, and of course,
totally different film.
Yeah, it's odd. Like I think the reason why is because kids, obviously they're going to go see Happy Feet. Parents, they're going to take their kids to Happy Feet. You're not going to take it to a James Bond film, but then when people saw these reviews, I mean, James Bond will always be big.
I think it was James. I think that film was a 12A. So parents, I mean, you will get parents who love James Bond who'll take their kids along. I think.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, but like I said, it was for that summer. It was the case of two huge films going against each other, and even though Happy Feet, in the short term, was more successful, in the long run, Casino Royale made its money back and then some, and it made a decent profit. For 450 million, which was lows at the time. It made a decent profit. It still probably could have made more, but yeah, a lot of it was down to its success in Europe as well. So in Europe, it was absolutely huge. It was the number one film, but in America, it took a decent while. But yeah, it inevitably won. It beat Happy Feet and became the biggest film of 2006. So yeah,
yeah. Okay, so this is my penultimate one, and it's hard to believe that this film was a surprise hit, and that's Jaws.
Yeah.
The 1975, I guess you'd describe it as horror film now.
Yeah.
Directed by Steven Spielberg. Had a budget of $9 million, and it made $472 million at the box office. By now we should all know the story of Jaws. It's a great white shark stakes a claim off Amity Island, killing several bathers. This prompts the police chief, Martin Brody, to hunt it down with the help of a marine biologist, Matt Hooper, and a professional shark hunter, Quint. So Richard Zanuck, David Brown, they were producers at Universal Studios. They actually purchased the right to the book, to Peter Benchley's book, Jaws, in 1973 for $175,000. And this was before the book was even published, so it's one of those, again.
Yeah, happens quite a
Yeah. They initially considered John Sturgis to direct it, so he did Magnificent Seven, Great Escape. But they instead gave the job to a guy called Dick Richards, who just completed a film for them called The Culpeper Kettle Company. It's a mouthful. But they dropped him from the project as he kept referring to the shark as the whale. So that was dumb. That annoyed them. So anyway, they were having a meeting with Steven Spielberg. He just completed the Sugarland Express for them, and he'd noticed the book in their office. He read it. He was captivated. He wanted to do it because he felt it had a similar theme to his earlier TV film Jewel.
Yeah.
About this sort of leviathan that's targeting the everyman. He then had cold feet about it because he didn't want to be known as the Truck and Shark director, and he was going to go to Fox and make Lucky Lady. But he was actually under contract to Universal for 2 pictures, so Brown helped convince him to stay with the project, and he said to him that after Jaws you can make all the films you want, which is pretty true, I think. It was given an estimated budget of $3.5 million and a shooting schedule of 55 days. Principal photography was set to begin in May 1974, and Universal wanted the shoot to finish by the end of June, when the major studio's contract with the Screen Actors Guild was due to expire, because they didn't want to have any disruption due to strikes or anything like that. This was the first major film to be shot on the ocean, and it resulted in a famously troubled shoot. And Spielberg said that it's probably his naivety that led to that. He was kind of a first-time director. He'd never worked with sort of, animatronics, special effects like that, and he'd never worked on the ocean before. So the budget started to climb from an initial 4 million to 9 million. Actually, 3 million of that went onto the shark, which was just didn't work. Filming wrapped on 6th of October 1974 after 159 days. And after this, Spielberg thought his career was over. He said nobody's gone over 100 days over schedule before. But Universal persevered, and they spent $1.8 million on marketing Jaws, including $700,000 on national television blitz advertising. So 2 days before its opening, they spent, like I say, $700,000 on 24 30-second advertisements airing each night on primetime TV. Now, this had been unprecedented before, the amount of marketing put into this film. The film opened on 20th of June. Now, this again was unusual because most films opened sort of around holidays. So Christmas was a big one, etc. And unlike the traditional way of opening a film, you open in small number of theatres and then you increase it. It had wide national release backed by heavy television advertising. So on the 20th of June, Jaws opened across the USA on 409 screens. It made $7 million in its opening weekend, $21 million in its first week, which easily recouped its production costs. And a lot of people put it down to the timing of the release. This showed studios that there was more money to be made during the summer than other times of the year. So this actually created that summer movie season, and this was considered the first summer blockbuster.
Yeah, and they did a lot to help this, didn't it? Yeah.
So traditionally, you'll find a lot of big films will get released around that end of June. That sort of week, 20th, 5th June, and that is now like the summer blockbuster season.
So if you think, when you release it on the holiday times, it's cold, people don't want to go out, they want to spend time with their family, and just summertime has a much bigger window for people to go out and see it, and they want to go
I
out.
reckon you've got kids who are on holiday from school, they're bored, so they go to the cinema. You've got people who want to get out of the sun, go to the cinema. Yeah, so people tend to have a lot more time off around summertime. So and it's hard to believe now that it was a doubt, and I mean, given initially a $4 million budget, it was really nothing at all back then.
I just don't get how people can make a film that much. First off, you got to pay the stars.
Yeah,
you got to pay all the production, like people involved. You got to buy the sets. You got to rent out places and stuff.
A lot of actors, what they do is they'll have a smaller upfront payment and then take a percentage of the profits.
Yeah.
So they're kind of they're tied into the film being a success.
So a lot was riding on this film. Yeah.
So
very interesting.
Yeah. And I think had it not been successful, then maybe it would have killed Spielberg's career.
Yeah, we never got his last loads of his films. It's crazy how things work like that, isn't it? But right, my next film is Die Hard with a Vengeance, and it's a 1995 American action thriller buddy film directed by John McTiernan. It was released by Jonathan Hensley based on the screenplay Simon Says by Hensley himself. The film stars Bruce Willis as NYPD Lieutenant John McClane and Samuel Jackson as McClane's reluctant partner Zeus Carver, who teams up to stop bomb threats across New York City carried out by Simon, played by Jeremy Irons. It was released on May 19th, 1995 to mixed reviews and became the highest grossing film of the year. So it was made on a budget of $90 million. It made $366 million for a total gross of $276 million. There are only a few reasons that caused this film to become a sleeper hit. The first is that it released to universal damning reviews, with the overall critic score 6 out of 10. It wasn't a film people were reeling to get off their seat for. Another reason is because of the second one being a disappointment. The first one is generally considered to be one of the greatest action films of all time. The second one, not so much. People expected the third to follow in the trend of worsening quality. 1995 just happened to be a great year for films such as Seven, Apollo 13, Heat, Braveheart, etc. It came up against stiff competition. It was only after people watched the film and saw how good it was that word spread, and it ended the year as the highest grossing film. It's just crazy how I don't get, like, I don't know if it's critics are over, like, analysing the film, but like this, when it first came out, this film was not, it was universally panned by critics, and once again it kept people from going to see it. And once again, Die Hard 2, it's not a movie, it isn't the best, is it? And people thought bringing a further one out would follow the downward trajectory. The films.
That's what happens, isn't it? Usually sequels aren't as good as their original.
No.
Die Hard was great. They, what tends to happen is they'll rush out a sequel to capitalise on the success of the original film. Again, Die Hard 2 is not a bad film.
No.
It's just not Die Hard.
No.
And then I guess people then, you've got Die Hard with a Vengeance, which came out how long after?
It came out 5 years after the
5 years
number
after,
two.
After number 2.
So it might not even been that relevant, you know what I mean? But yeah, I'm guessing it sort of came out of nowhere, it took people off, caught people off guard, and I just don't at the start with the critics and everything, and number 2, I don't think people were really rushing to get to the cinema to watch it. But then when people realise, because it's actually a really good film, isn't it? With Vengeance.
That's the problem with filmmaking. Half the battle is getting the film made, and half the battle is getting it shown in cinemas and people going to see it. Yeah. And if people don't go and see it, then it's just not going to be a success.
But like I said, it made no money in the first half. But then when people realised how good it was, it made it beat out, like I said, 7, Apollo 13, Heat, Braveheart. It beat all of them to become the highest grossing film of that year.
Yeah,
so it's crazy how these things happen. Isn't it? Right.
All right.
On to your last.
So we can't finish a podcast without mentioning this film.
Because we are absolute nerds of this film.
And that would be Star Wars, the 1977 space opera fantasy directed by George Lucas. The budget for this was finally $11 million, and it made at the box office $775 million. The film, for those who haven't seen Star Wars, the film follows the journey of Luke Skywalker, a simple farm boy who becomes caught in the galactic conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion. After coming into possession of 2 droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO, who were carrying the schematics of the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star. While attempting to deliver the droids to the Rebellion, Luke is joined by Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, who teaches him about the metaphysical power known as the Force. Cynical smuggler Han Solo, his Wookiee companion Chewbacca, and Rebellion leader Princess Leia. Meanwhile, Imperial officers Darth Vader, a Sith Lord, and Grand Moff Tarkin, the commander of the Death Star, seek to retrieve the stolen schematics and locate the Rebellion's secret base. I think that covers it pretty much, doesn't it?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So, in this day and age, when pretty much you can't turn the TV on or turn around without some kind of Star Wars
reference,
yeah, it's hard to believe that this was considered a box office risk.
It's mental.
But it was very much so when A New Hope was in production. So we kind of have to go back to the beginning for this. So George Lucas had the idea for a space fantasy film in 1971 after completing his first feature film, which was THX 1138, which was a box office bomb. THX 1138 started off, it was a 20-minute student film that he'd made when he was at UCLA. And he was offered a first feature film with Francis Ford Coppola's American Zoetrope production company, and he chose to expand THX 1138 to be a feature film. and it bombed at the box office. The studio, because of the controversies surrounding, I think there was a nudity in the film, the studio demanded that their money be returned, and that almost bankrupt American Zoetrope. So that's where where he was at that time. He really wanted to make Flash Gordon, but the rights were owned by Dino De Laurentiis, and he just couldn't get De Laurentiis to sell him the rights to it. So he decided that he'd write his own. At that time, he had a 2-film development deal with United Artists. The 2 films were American Graffiti and a space opera, tentatively titled The Star Wars, inspired by Flash Gordon. Lucas went to United Artists, showed them the script for American Graffiti, but they passed on the film, which was then picked up by Universal Pictures. United Artists also passed on Lucas's space opera concept, which he then shelved for the time being. So he spent the next 2 years completing American Graffiti. Lucas turned his attention to his space opera. He spent 4 months writing and presenting a 13-page treatment to United Artists, who passed. Universal, the studio that financed American Graffiti, while they agreed it could be a very commercial venture, they had doubts about Lucas's ability to pull it off, so they also passed. So Universal actually had doubts about Lucas as a director, and that's why they passed on it. Francis Ford Coppola, who probably should have never spoken to Lucas again, actually brought the project to a division of Paramount Pictures, where he ran it with fellow directors Peter Bogdanovich and William Friedkin. But Friedkin questioned Lucas's ability to direct the film, and he, along with Bogdanovich, declined to back it. So again, they questioned Lucas's directorial ability. And interestingly enough, he took it to Walt Disney Productions.
I didn't realise he took the Disney.
Turned it down. And they probably kicking themselves down. They could have saved themselves, what, $4 billion?
$4 billion, yeah.
So anyway, Lucas took it to 20th Century Fox. And Alan Ladd Jr., who was the head of Fox at the time, in June 1973, he signed him on to direct the film. Although Ladd did not grasp the technical side of the project, he believed that Lucas was talented. Lucas later stated that Ladd invested in me. He did not invest in the movie. So the deal gave Lucas $150,000 to write and direct the film. The initial budget given to them was $5 million, which was later increased to $8.25 million. Now, you put that in context, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released at the same time, had a budget of $19.5 million. So it was a really, really low budget film. Yeah. And Lucas sold it on that concept that it was going to be like a Roger Corman type low budget film. But the problem was that despite Lucas's efforts, his crew had little interest in the film. Most of the crew considered the project a children's film, and they rarely took their work seriously. Most of the cast thought it would be a failure. They had no real faith in Lucas as a director. He rarely spoke to the actors, who believed that he expected too much of them while providing little direction. His directions to the actors usually consisted of the words faster and more intense.
Yep.
He was described as very much a loner, very shy, didn't like large groups of people, didn't like working with a large crew, didn't like working with a lot of actors, so you kind of think it's an odd profession to go into. And subsequently, the film, they had to reassess their budget. They were running out of money. So after requests for more money, the executives got a bit scared. And so essentially for 2 weeks, Lucas and his crew didn't really do anything except put together new budget figures. At the same time, after the production fell behind schedule, Ladd told Lucas he had to finish the production within a week or he would be forced to shut down the production. So it came to sort of a climax where they needed more money, they'd gone over schedule, and they were a week off the project being shut down, which is amazing. Right? Yeah. So it came out to be like something like 9.8 million, and in the end they just said, yes, that's okay, we'll go ahead. And to complete filming, they actually had to split into 3 units and work sort of 24 hours a day almost, but they managed to complete it. And that's not where the problems ended. Lucas was going to use 20th Century Fox's visual effects department, but found it being disbanded. So he had to create his own industrial light and magic. And they were essentially starting from scratch, trying to develop these cutting-edge special effects. Star Wars was originally slated for a release on Christmas '76. However, its production delays pushed the film's release to mid-1977. Industrial Light and Magic had spent half of its budget on 4 shots that Lucas deemed unacceptable, with hundreds of unaccomplished shots remaining. ILM was forced to finish a year's work in 6 months. In February 1977, Lucas screened an early cut of the film for Fox executives and several director friends. The cut used Prowse's voice for Darth Vader. It also lacked most of the special effects. The reactions of the directors present, such as Brian De Palma, John Milius and Steven Spielberg, disappointed Lucas. But in contrast, Ladd and the other studio executives loved it, which is kind of amazing, really.
Yeah.
The original crawl text, when they saw it, they said, "Oh, it's too long, doesn't make any sense." So actually, Brian De Palma reworked that for Lucas. So you could say that Star Wars isn't really Lucas's film.
It's almost like a group.
Yeah, and a lot of his director
project.
friends gave their own input. And,
Yeah.
and so they all had some input into it.
Wasn't
as
also
well.
like Ron Howard on set as well, wasn't he?
I think he visited the set. Yeah. It's odd that his friends and other film people didn't like it, but the actual executives loved it. The budget had now climbed to $11 million.
Yeah.
They were worried that Star Wars would be beaten out by other summer films, such as Smokey and the Bandit. So rather than open it in June, which would be traditional for a summer film, they moved the release date to the 25th of May, which is the Wednesday before Memorial Day. But it just shows all along the project how much lack of faith
Yeah, they had in
the
this film.
film companies had in it. The actors, the crew, and even the film company itself. Fewer than 40 theatres ordered the film to be shown. And so Star Wars debuted on Wednesday, the 25th of May, 1977, in fewer than 32 theatres, and 8 more on Thursday and Friday. Because George Lucas strongly believed that his film would be a flop, he skipped the premiere and went on holiday to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg. So even he didn't have faith in his own film. And ironically, on this holiday, this is where they developed the idea for Indiana Jones.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
So, yeah. And just goes to show, Fox had so little faith in Lucas that he was due another payment, $500,000 fee for directing Star Wars, and he gave that up in exchange for the merchandising and sequel rights. And Fox either not showing any foresight or just being so little faith in the success of Star Wars.
They gave it up to him,
gave
didn't
it
they?
up to him, yeah.
Which is a huge mistake.
But in its first 6 days, it earned $2.5 million across 43 screens, which isn't a bad return.
No, it's not bad now.
It was number one at the box office for 3 weeks. They gradually added screens, returning to number one and spending 15 weeks at the top. It earned $220 million in its initial theatrical run, and 6 months into its release, it had overtaken Jaws as the highest earning film in North America. So that's pretty bizarre when you think
Mental
about
that just the amount of things that went against this film.
But the fact is that they've said, a lot of them said, we don't have faith in you as a director. We don't think you're a very good director, which personally I don't think he is. But, I think he kind of looked out.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But again, it's maybe just he caught the public imagination at the right time.
Well, we always say all the time where the 70s was filled with disaster flicks and really depressing movies.
You had films about the dystopian future, and it was all negative. And the thing is that was the concept of THX 1138 was a futuristic negative film.
Yeah.
And so he made. That's probably why he wanted to make like a campy Flash Gordon sort of film.
Just
a little bit more upbeat, more humour in it as well. A bit more
came at the
positive
right
as
time,
well.
didn't it?
Yeah.
This is the thing. Maybe had Star Wars come out nowadays, it might have been panned. You never know. It just came out at the right time, right place, right
Back
time.
then they said, science fiction is dead, and he's trying to explain, it's not really science fiction, it's more of a fantasy kind of space opera. But yeah, it's bizarre to think that against all the odds, that is,
and it made so
the
much
one
money.
film that had everything against it that just made so much money. Yeah.
Well, it's after inflation, it's still, I believe, the highest grossing film of all time. So
Yeah. And just the spin-off and the merchandise. I mean, the merchandise alone is worth, billions.
Well, this is the thing. The merchandise has actually made more money. They've made more money off the merchandise than they have the films.
Yeah.
So it was just goes to show that Fox were wrong to not have so little faith and give the sequel rights to George Lucas. But very interesting. And there's, like I said, I like to think of myself as a Star Wars buff, but I didn't. There's a few things in there I didn't realise.
There's so much more as well. I could have gone on and on and on and on.
Yeah, we
and
can
on
talk for
for
ages
hours
about
the problems that they had and things like that. But no,
you can tell what both our favourite film franchises, can't you? Right. My last film was Iron Man. And Iron Man is a 2008 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. Produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Paramount Pictures, it is the first film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, better known as the MCU. Directed by Jon Favreau from a screenplay by the writing teams of Mark Ferguson, Hawk Otsby, and the Art Markham and Matt Holloway. The film stars Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark and Iron Man, alongside Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, Sean Toub, I think that's how you say his name, and Gwyneth Paltrow. In the film, following his escape from captivity by a terrorist group, world-famous industrialist and master engineer Tony Stark builds a mechanized suit of armor and becomes a superhero Iron Man. It was made on a budget of $140 million. It made $585.8 million for a total gross of $448 million. Iron Man premiered in Sydney on April 14, 2008, and was released in the United States on May 2nd as the first film in Phase 1 of the MCU. Now, there's quite a few different reasons why this film was considered a sleeper hit and why it wasn't this huge, nowadays it's any superhero film. We're in the age of superhero films, aren't we, really?
Definitely, yeah.
And they easily go into the billions, but it really didn't make that much money in its first initial run. There's many reasons for this. Marvel films before this, for example, like the Fantastic Four 1 and 2, were critically panned and are considered to be some of the worst superhero films and just films in general ever made. And maybe people thought that this was going to follow the same tropes and be a huge disappointment like the previous films. Like I said, Marvel was always known as more of the campy side of superhero movies, where DC. So
I was just to say, wasn't Iron Man sort of surprise for people because he wasn't a major character in the comic books?
So, like celebrities, there's a tier system to superheroes, and tier A superheroes like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, and Iron Man. All of them are now considered A because they're huge, but back then, because you think this is what 13 years ago, back then Iron Man was maybe considered a C tier or B tier. He was not famous in the slightest compared to Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, and it was a very odd decision for them to. I still don't even know why they decided to go with Iron Man. Maybe because he's the leader of the Avengers, but that was a very weird choice. People would have thought. I mean, they couldn't get Spider-Man because they didn't hold the rights to him. Sony did.
Sony, wasn't it? Yeah.
But you think they start off with I don't know, Captain America or something like that, but maybe he was just
Thor.
But Iron Man was definitely nowhere near the. And
or even Hulk. I know they've had. Well, perhaps it's the fact that they Iron Man hasn't had any previous films.
It only had a TV film, and it looked ridiculous. It looked like something out of Doctor Who.
Spider-Man is a well-known character, had lots of films.
Like the Tobey Maguire ones are huge.
Hulk has had a few films, so maybe they wanted to maybe start with.
It could have been maybe,
possibly.
But obviously they've done it right.
Yeah,
but like I said, it was coming off a long list of quite bad Marvel films. Like I said, DC are more of the gritty down to realistic films, and obviously that same year The Dark Knight came out and it made over $1 billion, and people thought that this film had no chance, compared to that. Another one is Robert Downey Jr. himself, the cast of him. I mean, even back then he was a huge name. He was an A-list celebrity for years, but obviously his past, like problems,
Personal issues.
personal issues off screen, caused him to maybe not at that time reach the heights you'd think he would. So he was hot off the. I think he got cast on this film from Zodiac because they liked how he was, and you could see the personality. Because this is the thing. It just happened to be that Robert Downey Jr. His personality is like how Tony Stark's is as well, and that's one of the main reasons why he got the part. But yeah, he wasn't exactly the most. Like I said, he was still an A-tier celebrity, like, but he just wasn't the most like relevant leading man at that point, you know. And plus the MCU as well, the whole MCU thing. People like once again, every film franchise has its own universe now, but that was a very new concept, wasn't it? Really, it started with the MCU. It really did. People couldn't quite get their head round a shared universe with different films.
Up to that point, you just had the standalone films that would have sequels, but then there was no real like crossover.
No, not at all. It was like I said, it was a very new thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think people either thought it was going to fail or it just wasn't that interesting. Because they knew it was going to be this whole phase 1 thing and then the phase 2 thing, but I don't know if people just didn't know what they were in for, basically. And plus the fact that it was Marvel themselves producing the film, like Marvel Studios itself, because in the late 90s they were going bankrupt and they had to sell all their assets, like their most profitable superheroes. So they sold Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Hulk, you name it, they sold them. And it was like other film studios made the movies. So like Sony made them. Sony bought Spider-Man, they made Spider-Man. Someone else bought Fantastic Four, they made Fantastic Four.
I think I remember reading that when Sony bought Spider-Man, they had the option to buy all the other.
Yeah, they did. They only wanted Spider-Man because he was the only real relevant
they only
one.
Wanted Spider-Man, so they lost out on
that. But yeah, it just. I think basically what happened, what helped this film was the fact that it's a really good film, and it's considered one of the best superhero films ever made. And for it to come out the same year as The Dark Knight, it held its own, and it kicked off probably the biggest after Star Wars, or maybe even big. You know, some people it's bigger, but probably the biggest film franchise ever now. So this film was pivotal in that, and
it certainly dropped the campy aspects of previous
100%.
films, and is a bit of a darker film, darker character, isn't it?
Yeah. Well. But this thing, I think once again, when people actually eventually went and saw the film, they realised how good the film was, and they realised, okay, this is the direction they're taking it. It's long gone is the basically shit we got before this with Marvel, and we're taking it in this direction, and they just rolled with it. And then obviously they brought out the other superhero movie, the character films, and then they brought out the Avengers and so on. And now it's like I said, it's the biggest films in the world now, aren't they? So. It's just interesting how they had, even from the studio, Marvel had really, really big doubts about starting with Iron Man, but really, who else could they have started with?
Yeah, like I say, I mean, it may be that the fact that,
he hadn't had a prior.
Yeah, Iron Man had no history. People had no connection to Iron Man.
No. And they can start from a clean slate then, can't they?
So a lot of the times when you're doing a remake of, say with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man and the new ones, you're going to have people who loved the Sam Raimi ones who don't really warm to the new ones.
Yeah.
So because they've got a history with that character and that franchise.
I tell you, like I said, I think it was over in the 70s or the 80s. There was a TV, like it was over a TV show or movie, and Iron Man was he looked between the Dalek and a Cyberman. He looked like that. It was ridiculous. So I don't think people had any prior connections, like you said, to the two. Yeah.
Because people have they'll have a history with a franchise. They'll like a franchise, and sometimes they're resistant to newer films.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, this is the reason why it made its money over a stretched period of time. So it's been a long one today, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's been good.
It's been good. Very good.
Yeah. That's it from us today. All that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us. You can find other content, we do have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and also our website, filmgeezers.com.
But we've reviewed A Quiet Place 2 on there, so if you want to see a brand new movie review, go out and see that.
Yeah, we'll be reviewing Nobody as well today, so that'll be on there probably tomorrow. Again, just thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Goodbye.